Station QRSA, the voice of the city, on the air 24 hours daily.
Wait a minute. You ain't heard nothing yet.
What should we do? Say, I'm just wild about Jolson.
As long as I don't have to sing, you guys.
Yeah. And with that familiar tune, we welcome you to the very first experimental episode of a talk show, Wild About Jolson. Basically what this is it's just a talk show where us Jolson fans can get together and discuss the world's greatest entertainer. We're all from different backgrounds, but we all have one thing in common, amongst possibly other things, and that's that we're all wild about Al Jolson. And let's get right into it. My name is Nigel Driner. We have three participants today in the first episode: Andrew, Andrea, and Vlad. And I guess we'll go ahead and start at the beginning. We'll start with Andrew to give us a little background on yourself and how you became a fan of the world's greatest entertainer.
Okay, thank you, Nigel. And first of all, thank you for having me on. It's a real pleasure to be on with three other Jolson fanatics. My name is Andrew Cerio. I live in Buffalo, New York. In my real life, I am a professor of Italian at the University of Buffalo. Besides Jolson, Italian is one of my greatest passions, Italian language and culture. I've lived in Italy. I teach Italian. I study Italian culture and language. I'm pretty much what you call bicultural, bilingual. But another great passion I've had since I was 15 is the passion for Al Jolson. I've loved Jolson since I was a kid. He's always been part of me since then. And since we're talking about how we got into Jolson, I'll give a brief but hopefully interesting little story about that. I remember I was 15, and at the time, my brother, who was 3 years older than me, was really into big band swing music. Glenn Miller, Tommy Dorsey, Harry James, Artie Shaw. And this was pre-internet, so to hear that kind of music, it was a matter of either taking a trip to a record store and hoping they had what you wanted, or finding a radio station that played that type of music. So my brother found an oldie station that played music from the 30s and 40s. It wasn't strictly devoted to jazz, but it was devoted to that era in general. So one day I remember I was driving home from school with my brother and my father in the car, and that station was on. And the Decca version of Rockabye Baby with the Dixie Melody by Jolson came on, and I was immediately struck by the voice, by the passion with which he sang, even by the orchestra, everything about it. I said to my father, I just said out loud, I said, "Who is this?" And my father, of course, knew because he grew up during the later stages of Jolson's career, having been born in the early 1930s. He remembers distinctly going to see the Jolson Story, by the way, in '46. And he said, "Oh, this is Al Jolson. This song is called Rockabye Baby." My father wasn't a Jolson fanatic, but he knew a little bit about Jolson. He said, "This song is called Rockabye Baby with the Dixie Melody," one of his standards. So from that point on, I was hooked. I did everything I could. And remember, this was before the internet, so I made a lot of trips to the library to gather as much information up about Jolson as I could. I made a lot of trips to a local record store, which I found downtown, that specialized in oldies, and made a lot of special orders. And of course, the first songs that I was able to hear were the Decca years, because those were the most, maybe still are the most available. But then later, as I got into it, I discovered that, wait a minute, he's been recording since 1911, and these other recordings for Victor, Columbia, and Brunswick may be harder to get your hands on, but once you do, they're gold, right? And so I began to amass a collection and began to amass knowledge about Jolson's Broadway career and, of course, his film career. And ever since then, it's been a constant. He's been a constant in my life, Jolson. He's always been there for me when I needed him. For one reason or another, Jolson was always there for me. I could turn to him anytime with just his voice. Sometimes is all it takes to change your mood or to lift up your day. So that's my story. Maybe not all that uncommon, but it's the story of how I've discovered Jolson and how he's become for me a lifelong interest.
Well, it's interesting to me that Jolson had such a long career. You have literally you have the same song, but you can listen to it from, like, let's just take, for instance, Rockabye. You have the 1918 version. You have the 30s version with kind of the swing elements in
right.
it.
I think it was recorded in 32, the version you're referring to.
Yeah. You had the Decca version. So it's like you have the same song, but you have 5 or 6 or 7, if you count radio and all that stuff.
Radio and also film soundtracks. He recorded that more than once for film. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I mean, you could make a CD almost entirely of
Right.
his greatest hits of the same song from the teens going all the way up to his passing,
And
which
it's
I
a lot
think
of-
is cool.
And it's a lot of fun picking and choosing between the versions of the same song, which one you like best. Although that's always not always easy to do. But what is it about this one that really gets you more so than that version? But wait, this version has this. So yeah, it's really
And he always sang it differently too, depending on the genre. He kind of adapted his style to whatever the style was of the day, attempting to anyway.
Yeah,
exactly.
and of course, just piggybacking what you said, Nigel, as Jolson himself said many times, I never sing a song the same way twice, and that's literally true, because if you've listened to some of the Columbia motion picture outtakes, if you've ever had the privilege of listening to some of those, they're surviving rehearsal takes, 4 or 5 takes in a row of the same song, and he literally never sang it the same way twice, even when he was rehearsing. It's remarkable.
That caused a lot of nightmares for Larry Parks when trying to lip sync for the Jolson story and Jolson Sings Again sessions.
And it caused a lot of nightmares for Al Jolson, because when the movies got to the technical, early in Jolson's career, as you folks know, but not everybody out there might, in his early movies, The Jazz Singer, The Singing Fool, he actually sang live as the cameras were rolling with an orchestra there. But very quickly, they figured out that technically the song would sound a lot better if you could pre-record it and insert it, and they figured out how to do it. And when Jolson had to lip sync later in his movie career, especially the movie Rosa Washington Square in 1939, it was a nightmare.
You know, I thought he actually did. I mean, people like to critique him on that, but I mean, for what it is, I actually think he did a pretty decent job, considering it was so hard for him to do that. I don't know, maybe that was what you see on the screen is a final take when he eventually got it right.
Don't know is the number of outtakes. I mean, and the official soundtrack that was released on CD about 10 years ago, which is a wonderful recording.
Phenomenal.
Of the Rosa Washington Square, is the best recording, as I say, of the old Jolson voice before it got deeper.
Right.
In some of the outtakes, right after he finishes singing, you hear somebody, I don't know if it's a conductor, or say something along the lines of, well, come on, and then you hear Jolson go, well, come on, it's hard to dub.
Yeah, you're right. All right, well, Andrea, you've been quiet. Why don't we let you go next and do your little introduction?
I'm a quiet person who likes to listen, yeah. My name is Andrea Overheiden Brent. Brent is my husband's last name. My husband is American. I'm German. I'm from Kiel in northern Germany. Almost hold a master's degree in German literature and film studies and philosophy and art history. My son's name actually is Glenn Jolson, because my husband and I, we only met because of Jolson, because I and my film partner Jens from university, we've been working on a Jolson documentary for almost 10 years now. And we've finished a little shorts during that work. And my husband, who founded a library, Jewish library in Lithuania, which happens to be Jolson's country of origin, he discovered that on the internet and wanted to have this film, one of the shorts, for his library. And then we got to meet, and then the rest is, we got married and had our son.
That's great how Jolson figures into that story. It really is.
It's funny, because before I met my husband, Jolson to me meant the topic of our documentary, and now when I think of Jolson, of course, it's more like related to my family history. So that's how it changes, how life intervenes, or however you want to call that. So I have to say, English, of course, is not my first language. So if I make mistakes, please be kind.
Thus far, you've made 0, so you're okay with me.
Okay,
your English is excellent.
Yes.
Oh, thanks. So okay, I try my best. What else about me? I work as an editor for subtitles. I do subtitles for commercial films in English, French, and Italian, and I also sometimes publish some articles, either in art catalogs, but I also published one on Al Jolson, actually, the first long article in German on Al Jolson and the Jewish jazz, in a book. Okay, you don't speak German, I guess, but it's the book's called Jazz in Film. It's a great book, unfortunately only in German, and my article is only part of it. I mean, there are lots of other articles on jazz and film, very interesting, actually. I mean, not just because of my article, but I also published a book on Nazi films, the concept of home in Nazi films and everything. So I come from more from the film historical side or view, and I discovered Jolson also through my university studies. I studied actually in Kiel here in northern Germany, but also attended lectures in Hamburg at the Hamburg University. And the professor there was an overview on film history. He mentioned the jazz singer as the first successful talkie. And I've never heard of it. I thought, how can that be? I mean, I thought I was already into film history and everything, but I've never heard of the jazz singer. And I think it's because most scholars say, oh, it's not really the first talkie, so we try to ignore that a little bit, which is weird because it changed the film history. It changed. I mean,
Certainly, yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird, but I remember the day was December 23rd, 2005, where I decided, okay, I have to watch this film. It was not shown at the university, so I got a copy, a very bad copy from Japan, I think, I have to admit. So I watched The Jazz Singer on that night, and it changed my life forever. I saw Jolson, and I think the first really performance I remember what really got me, which caught me, was when he sang Tutu Tutsi, and then later, of course, Blue Skies. I thought, wow, how is it that I've never heard of this performer? Because before that, I've never, ever heard of Al Jolson before. Although he did, his films did play and what were shown in German movie theaters in 1909 and in 1930, also in Kiel actually. But first the Singing Fool was shown, and then the Jazz Singer. I only found that out later, of course. But then, of course, we had the Nazi times, and then there was no Jolson. And then later in the 50s, they also showed the Jolson story, but they advertised it at the Jazz as the Jazz Singer, which is weird. But
wow. Well, yeah, it's like in Germany, the Godzilla movies are redubbed and retitled to be all the Godzilla creatures are creations of Dr. Frankenstein.
Oh,
because
really?
I guess in Germany, it somehow over weird translation that it is, I guess Frankenstein is also used as the word monster.
Yeah.
So Godzilla's a monster, so they just call him Frankenstein. It's this weird. Yeah, it's a because if you look at the Godzilla posters from Germany, they all say Frankenstein on them, which I think is hilarious.
That's I did not know that. That's something I have to look into. That's kind of funny.
Andrea, you said The Singing Fool was released in Germany before The Jazz Singer.
Yes, and was a huge success. Yeah.
So in Germany, is that considered the first talkie, or was there something that came out before that?
I think scholars know that, of course, The Jazz Singer actually was released before that, but it was just, I think, in the heads of the people, at least back then, they felt like the Singing Fool was the first one. And then because they saw, oh, that's very successful, let's also show the Jazz Singer. And then, of course, in 1930, I think that was the last time Jolson was shown, because then kind of, Jewish topics and everything, that was not, so much. Yeah.
If I could interject just a little historical bit here. The Jazz Singer wouldn't have been the first sound film shown over in Europe for the simple reason that there weren't any theaters that were wired for sound. Even
exactly.
In the US, the Jazz Singer only had a limited release in as a sound film when it first came out. Now, of course, after the big success, they had a year to set up sound projection, and so when The Singing Fool came out, that made, we all know it was the biggest film in America until Gone with the Wind 11 years later. But my own father, who was living in Yugoslavia at the time, he was quite a bit older than me. He was born in 1907. So I remember talking to him in the 80s and him telling me that, oh, yeah, he remembered very well when seeing Sonny Boy. I don't know if they actually translated into that or he just remembered it as Sonny Boy. Obviously, it was a Singing Fool. In probably it was 29. It was probably a year after it actually came out in 1929 in Novi Sad, and he said it was a sensation. My father spoke 8 languages, so he wouldn't have needed the subtitles. But so that's why the Jazz Singer probably wouldn't have been the first sound film shown abroad, because when it hit,
makes sense. Yeah, very interesting. It makes a lot of sense too, though. These foreign theaters must have said, well, we can't show this film. We don't have the Vitaphone. We don't have the ability to show it. But then by the time Singing Fool came out, they said, okay, this is going to catch on. We better start showing some sound with our movies. And then maybe they re-released the Jazz Singer after the Singing Fool.
Yeah.
Too, in other countries, even up until 1931, some theaters weren't equipped for sound. And Universal, when they made Dracula in 1931, they actually made a silent version of the film, not like its own separate thing. They took the sound film and they re-edited it into a silent, so it could be played in movie houses that still weren't equipped for sound in 1931. And that's something I've always wanted to see, is the silent version of Dracula from 1931 as a silent film. I think that would be incredibly striking. And I hope, I bet you somebody, even if it doesn't exist anymore, somebody could probably, with, their computer, put together what it would have looked like.
All right.
So I'm not sure exactly when every place in the world was wired for sound, but it certainly still wasn't up, almost 4 years later in 1931. So that'd be an interesting thing to research.
For sure.
Shall I introduce myself now, or Andrew?
Sure, Vlad. Yes, go right on ahead.
Well, I'm the fellow who's interrupting, but I'm a trained lawyer, so I guess maybe that gives me an excuse. I do that. But,
Should we all stop talking now then? We're going to incriminate ourselves.
I'm going to try to be as brief as I can. Now, that's the Jolie persona, but we'll get to that in a minute. My name is Vlad Petnicki. I'm a former American Air Force officer. By the name, as you can tell, I'm not originally from these shores. I was actually born in the former Yugoslavia. So that's one thing that I say, I have one thing in common with Al Jolson, that is we both came to the U.S. as kids from, somewhere out east in Europe. I've been a Jolson fan since, it's interesting. I came to the U.S. when I was 11. I lived in New York City, and watching TV in the 70s, every so often the local channels would run commercials for made for TV, as they used to call them, and some of you might remember that. Andrew, I'm not exactly sure how old you are, but back in those days, made for TV greatest hits albums.
Mm-hmm.
And they would sell more cheaply, and the quality wasn't as good as
like the K-Tel disco records and all that stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
They did this for Jolson, and every time that they played it, they would play snippets of his songs. I remember always thinking, "Wow, this really sounds good, interesting." Well, a few years later, when I was in college, the Turner Broadcasting was running similar commercials for greatest hits of Jolson, and this time they had some of his clips from his movies. And I remember one Saturday morning watching the commercial and saying, "I'm not watching these commercials anymore," and not going out and getting the record. And I walked out the door, got a bus, got Jolson's Decca double album greatest hits, listened to it, and it sounded weird compared to the music I've been listening to, but the man's voice was so rich, it was so resonant, so emotional, it was mesmerizing. So I would just keep playing it, and within a month I'd found all the Decca records, and then I started going to places like specialty record stores, places like Times Square in New York, and a few years later in State Street in Chicago, picking up every single private pressing of the rare Jolson material, the earlier 78s that have been compiled on LPs and some radio shows. And as they say, the rest is history. For many years in the 90s and early 2000s, I really, you get busy with your career, raising kids. I didn't really listen to music much, but about 3 or 4 years ago, I started listening to Jolson again, and with the internet, I managed to contact folks and completed my collection primarily by getting all of his radio programs. And after listening to them on a thumb drive, that I have in my car that has over 200 hours of Jolson on it, for about a year, I just, I have something that Andrew said really resonated with me, and that is, the only two ways that I know of when I'm feeling down or depressed to get out of that, one is just to go out for a run or something like that. The other thing is just to put on Jolson. And I've never had this experience with any other singer or any other music. I mean, if I put on Al Jolson, it doesn't really matter what he's singing.
It's an escape. It's a complete escape. Yeah.
His voice was magical, and what he had in his soul that he communicated by singing was something that, to me, everyone obviously has personal preferences as far as music and singers go, but to me, I've never heard anyone in any genre of music that does anything like that for me. So about 2 years ago, I don't have an entertainment background. Obviously, I was a JAG military prosecutor for for years. I was also a translator, a military translator overseas when we were involved in Bosnia in the 90s. So I mean, I had some quote unquote performing experience, if you will, and training. Training to get up in front of people and not freeze up. But no entertaining or singing or musical background. But about 2 years ago, I got the idea that I want to do something. The way I put it is, Jolie's brought me his music and his humor and his personality have brought me so much joy, over 3 decades. It was time for me to do whatever small part I could to try to keep his legacy alive. And, I knew I could get up and I could do the staccato delivery and, tell some of the, as Jolie would call them, bum jokes.
Staccata.
You hear the one about my father? The father in the overcoat? It's a joke that only works if you can deliver it like that. And I decided to take some singing lessons just to see if, I could learn how to sing and then maybe passably, in a way somewhat reminiscent of Jolson because, I'm 2 years later, I put together, without the help of anybody, really, kind of a one-man show that I performed at veterans' homes here in California. I mean, it's a hobby.
And those are on YouTube too, if anybody wants to check them out.
Yeah, I've done it a couple times this year, and in November I'm going back to the Yountville Vets Home, which is the largest one in California. There are about 1,100 veterans there. I mean, my thought was, obviously that's an audience that remembers Jolson, certainly is familiar with his music. It's an audience that Jolson himself called his greatest audiences, the GIs that he sang to in World War II and Korea. But, my secret hope is that of the younger people who are there, because the folks who work at these homes, for example, they come out and listen, and so they're always family members. And, my hope is that a few of those folks who maybe never heard of Jolson might think after listening to me that let me look up this guy Jolson, download some of his music. And if any of them have done that, then I've succeeded in what I'm trying to do in my own little way.
Isn't it funny that the people like us that get into this Jolson thing, it's like I don't want to say he's obscure now, but we feel like we feel the need to spread so much information about him because there's so much misinformation in the world about Al Jolson.
Right.
So we kind of make it our mission to fix that.
I want to say something because when I got this crazy idea, and after about a month of taking singing lessons, I heard enough improvement that I'm not a great singer. I never will be. That's not what I'm saying. But going from a guy who never sang to somebody who's done this, well, when I started hearing improvement in my own voice, I thought this is really weird. This is totally daffy. The fellow my age, north of 50, not too far north of 50, but north of 50, could do this. I'm just going to go with it and see where it goes. But the other thing that I thought was something that I owe to Mr. Jolson and his legacy is to insert a biographical part. And I do that. I break up my show in 2 parts. The second part is a USO recreation where I actually come out in a World War II era type uniform and try to recreate a show that he would give to the troops, complete with the jokes from that era and whatever. But at the beginning of the show and also before the second half, I have a little slideshow and a little presentation. And the one thing, obviously, the thing about Jolson, because folks who knew Jolson personally, folks who saw him perform, they're almost all gone. So if somebody never heard of Jolson, they put an Al Jolson into Google, the first picture that comes up is a picture of Gus, who of course was Jolson's stage blackface character when he was on Broadway. And that brings up connotations today that are not entirely positive, shall we say.
Yeah.
But it doesn't say anything about historical context. And what really needs to be remembered is the fact that Jolson did more than any other white performer in the first half of the 20th century to advance the cause of equal treatment of African Americans in the entertainment business. I mean, if you go to the very good Jolson page in Wikipedia, you can see a lot of examples of that. And I try to bring that up. I don't show any pictures of him in blackface, in the slideshow because, they'll see those in Google. What I want to show is pictures of him, dancing and singing with Cab Calloway, and screenshots, screen grabs from the movie The Singing Kid. The picture of him with his band. I mean, the band that backed up the road show of Big Boy, which was an all African American band because those were the best musicians of that music, and that's the only thing Jolson cared about.
Yeah.
You know, there's a wonderful story that you guys are familiar with, but maybe some folks who are listening to this don't know. Is in 1915. I mean, 1915, Jolson was 29. I mean, he was a huge star on Broadway, but he was still, relatively young. He was in Connecticut. I think was it Hartford, Connecticut? Correct me if I'm wrong. With a road show of one of his Broadway plays, and he picked up the newspaper, and he saw the night before two not particularly well known at the time African American performers, musicians, a fellow by the name of U.B. Blake, who played piano, and Noble Sissle, who was his lyricist. I think those of us who might have heard of him since then, that they were denied service at a hotel restaurant in the same city. I think it was Hartford, Connecticut. Well, Jolson immediately had his folks track these guys down, drove out there to the hotel, introduced himself. I mean, he didn't know them from Adam. They had, U.B. Blake wasn't a household word as yet in terms of, being one of the greatest jazz and ragtime pianists and composers. And he told them he was going to take them to that restaurant where they were denied service. And the quote was, and if they refuse to serve you, I'm going to punch them right in the face. That quote is from Noble Sissle's autobiography.
Yeah.
They prevailed on him that, that probably wasn't the best thing to do. So as Noble Sissle relates in his autobiography, for the rest of the night, Jolson took him to a Jewish deli, bought him sandwiches, and he said for the rest of the night, we sat on the hood of his car eating sandwiches while he performed for us.
Wow.
I think this is something we could definitely get into in a future podcast, but I agree with everything you're saying, Vlad, and also I want to talk about something that Nigel said a few minutes ago about the misinformation out there. There's a lot of misinformation. I think anyone who's been into Jolson for as long as we all have, we could probably do a whole podcast on all the times we've attempted to dispel some of this misinformation, but there's misinformation regarding the whole blackface thing, which I think the main problem there, like I said, this is probably something for a future podcast, but I think the main problem there is people try to impose 2000 or 21st century standards on early 20th century practice. So I think that's one thing we could talk about. There's also misinformation on Jolson's ego, his stinginess, which anyone who's studied Jolson for as long as we have know that there's a lot of, like Nigel said, way too much misinformation out there about all three of those topics and many others as well.
Yep, absolutely. And I'm just going to throw in a quick personal anecdote, and then I promise I'll keep my mouth shut for a couple of minutes. In 1985, I just happened to be clerking in Washington, D.C. at the time, and saw in some local newspaper that the Jolson Society was going to hold a celebration of Jolson's centenary. As we know now, that was a year early, but anyway, they weren't so sure back then. And they were going to show Hallelujah, I'm a Bum in one of the theaters that are part of the Smithsonian Museum. So, I went there, and that's how I first got in contact with the society the first time around. I had the privilege of meeting Albert Jolson, Jolson's son, who was there. And so I saw the movie. It was the first. I'd been a Jolson fan for 3 years. I'd never seen one of his movies. And so I sat in the front, and I mean, the first thing that I saw were the expressions on his face, because he was, it was something that I learned how to do in vaudeville. I mean, he had the most expressive face in a comic way. It was wonderful. But to get to the point of the story, when everything was over and I was leaving, I stopped at the last row of the movie theater. And I was amazed, because in the very last row, it was not a full house, but in the very last row, were seated about at least a dozen, probably closer to 20, African-American ladies. The youngest one couldn't have been under the age of 75. They were all dressed in their Sunday finest, like they were going to Easter Sunday services at church, complete with, hats and everything else. And I stood there and I was amazed. I was like, these women were old enough to have, known him even, but certainly to have seen him perform live. And here they got dressed up like they were going to Easter Sunday services and come to see, probably for the last time they would ever have an opportunity to actually see Jolson on the big screen.
Yeah.
So somebody tells me that Al Jolson was a racist or whatever. I mean, I just tell them that story. I mean, do you really think that the African Americans of his day would have loved him the way that they did if they perceived that what he was doing was negative?
Yeah.
I mean, he was one of the greatest supporters of up and coming African American artists, and fighter for equal treatment of them in the show business, and had so many African American artists as personal friends over to his house, which, as one of them later wrote in her autobiography, and again, this is all on the Jolson wiki page, in Hollywood, everything was okay, but we didn't get invited to people's houses except for, Al Jolson and Ruby Keeler.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And another thing, if I may add, when you look at Jolson's performances in blackface, I mean, of course, when you see blackface, that's the problem right now. But if you really look at his performances in blackface, I don't see anything racist in it. If you really look through the entire performance, I always thought of it much more as an homage to that kind of culture. Or we talked to Stephen Mohannan, who portrayed Jolson in one of the plays. I forgot the title of the play actually, but and he said that Jolson must have related, as Jew, must have related so much to the whole experience of the American African Americans that this is more that tied them together. So he was coming more from their point of view, or from their experience. So this is what I see when I see Jolson in blackface, performing in blackface. It's always just like Plantation Act, for example. That's just amazing how he performs, and I don't see anything racist
One
in
of
it
my
if you
favorites.
allow yourself
Right.
if you allow yourself to look behind just this blackface thing. I mean, if you
Right.
really look at the performance, it's not racist at all. But for doing that, you need to really a little go deeper into the whole thing and not be so superficial like a lot of people
And you kind of
nowadays are.
Which most
Right.
people don't do. They see the image and they make their
Yeah,
assumptions from one image that they see, and then that's
exactly.
their opinion.
And
They didn't.
Plantation Act, I think. Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry if I just may say, Plantation Act. I think when watching it too, if you're looking for social commentary while watching it, you kind of have to watch it from a 1926 perspective if you're able to put yourself into that place. Because again, like I referred to earlier, it's hard to watch that with politically correct atmosphere of 2015. But obviously, the performance that was made on that day was appreciated and approved even by, like Vlad said, African American audiences for its time.
Yeah.
You need look no further than the documented fact that in the 1920s, Al Jolson was the only white man who was allowed into several Harlem Jazz nightclubs.
Yeah.
I wish they'd had iPhones, because I'm sure no way he could have done that without getting up and performing. At least with
Yeah.
some of the talent who was there. And I wish we had recordings of that. But of course, by the time Jolson made it big on Broadway in the teens and the 20s, blackface was an accepted theatrical convention that even some African American performers donned, and we're not talking about crude 19th century minstrel shows, although some aspects of that are, you see that in a couple of Jolson movies, but those movies, at least Swanee River, they deal with a period of time that was 100 years earlier than
Yeah.
the movie.
Exactly.
Of course, we're all familiar with the wonderful scene from the Singing Kid. The one number, I can't remember now exactly what it's called, but the one big production number where Jolson appears in what I call a modified blackface. Now, it's a black and white film, but it's not charcoal black. You can tell that it's lighter. And all the other performers in the piece, all the other dancers, are really African Americans, starting with Cab Calloway. I mean, those folks didn't have any problem, appearing.
Right.
And if you listen to the one show, the Shell Chateau radio show, where Cab Calloway appears as a guest, which I think it's only been made available fairly recently.
Pretty recently, right?
Pretty recently, the repartee between him and Cab Calloway, I mean, it's no act. It's quite different than the way Jolson related to any of his other guests and all the other shows of the time that I listened to. And what I mean by that is, you just listen to it. There's a friendliness and a fellow feeling and an understanding between them that, Jolson lets his hair down even a little bit, the way that he's talking to Calloway. And it was not an accident. I mean, I think, which is obvious to us, Jolson adopted a lot of the performing style and of African American performers that he was exposed to as he was as a young kid, learning his crafts. And so naturally he admired them, and he tried to help them.
Certainly.
All right. And it's good to see that there are at least some influential African Americans today that can understand that, because recently we saw that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar had written a blog piece or a letter in which he mentions Jolson and mentions that Jolson. He mentions some of the facts Vlad just mentioned, that he was one of the few white performers allowed into Harlem nightclubs. And one line that really struck me that Abdul-Jabbar wrote very recently was that when Jolson sang in blackface, he performed more naturally in blackface than he did without the blackface, by Jolson's own admission. And also, when Jolson sang in blackface, it was as if he was doing it for all downtrodden people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Jolson would love to know that in 2015, someone as well known as Kareem AbdulJabbar would still be able to recognize that, because it's become lost on so many people.
People today are just not. History is not one of the big topics, but I mean, studying history, it's pretty obvious.
For a lot of people today, it seems like anything historical that happened before the year they were born doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I wanted to add something, if I may. Look at the performances when he plays Guz in Big Boy, when he sings with the African Americans, "Let My People Go." I think that's an amazing scene, an amazing performance, and that pretty much says it all about also the entire role of Guz. On which side he is, if you want to see it like that.
Well, yeah, I mean, as you've touched on this before, but as a Jewish immigrant in the late 19th century, Jolson would have seen and felt on his own hide, as we would say, the kind of discrimination against Jews that was
exactly
rampant at that time. So naturally, he would have had fellow feeling with African Americans who were experiencing even worse discrimination.
And I think the African Americans, I think they understood that, which is something that I don't think is understood today. But back then it was.
I have something. Jens and I, in 2007, I believe, we were standing at Broadway, on Broadway, and we were kind of naive at that time because we were not really into this blackface thing, because as Germans, I know it's a little weird now, I understand, but back then Germans had the Jews, as enemies, so to speak, and we were not so much into this whole blackface thing, why that was a problem. Of course, later I saw that and I got into this topic, but that was very early in our Jolson work. So we were standing on Broadway and trying to interview people randomly, asking if they knew who Al Jolson was and everything. And there was an African American coming along and saying, "Yeah, of course." And he was starting to sing "My Mammy," and he said that he knows that Jolson is pretty much seen as a racist, but he didn't feel like that at all.
Wow.
And it's the only experience we ever had with an African American saying that. But
we have to find him and have him on the show.
Yeah, definitely. We had him in one of our shorts, and of course he will also be in our actual film. Of course, we didn't note down his name, because at the time we had no clue how important that actually was that a black man says that. So.
And Andrea, you actually visited Jolson's birthplace.
Oh yeah, that is, from all the trips we made, this, I must say, was the most moving experience I ever had. We had a Jewish guide who was very familiar with the whole history of this little village, Cerio, where Jolson was born. He spoke Yiddish and a little German, and of course English. So, but he guided us through this, and mixture of Yiddish and German, which was amazing. And of course I cannot show you the pictures right now, but we drove, of course, through this little village, and the little those old houses are still standing, not from Jolson's time, because I think during World War I, pretty much the whole village burned down. But the spots where the houses were standing, this is still the same. So it's a little village close to Kaunas, which is a much bigger city. So there's nothing really changed so much in this little village, other than, of course, all Jews are gone. And if you know the Harry Jolson's book, he describes at the beginning, I think, a little bit how this village was. There was it was going uphill, and where they lived was, I think, more up, because more down the street, I think the sister's house, I don't remember exactly, something was flooded. So you could kind of recreate the experience. And of course, the most amazing thing was that the foundation of the synagogue where Jolson's father was working, and Jolson, of course, also attended this as a kid, the foundations are still standing.
Wow.
It burned down, and of course, incredible crimes were taking place there during World War II. I remember that the guide said that all the male Jews, children and adults, were locked into the synagogue, and then I think they burned it down. So what you only, with them in it, of course, so what you only have now is the foundation. But it's the original foundation, and also an original cemetery from Jolson's time, where we had another historian, a woman there, who said that this baby sister of Jolson's, who was buried there, was stillborn, I believe, must have been buried there as well. So a few tombstones are left, not the ones from Jolson's sister, but of course this is the original cemetery, Jewish cemetery there, which is incredible. Because
Wow.
this is it, and of course we have it from Harry Jolson's book, also with the river, which was frozen when they were playing there as children and everything. It's incredible. Or the boat trip they took from Ceregis to Kaunas. Harry wrote about that as well, and you could kind of that was amazing.
Well, it's clear to me that the three of you are certainly legitimate for being on a Jolson talk show. We all have our stories. I mean, when I was in middle school, I had liked King Kong and movies from the monster movies and things, and I had seen the 1933 King Kong, and I got interested in the fashion and stop motion animation and everything, and how everything they did back then, and as well as the Max Steiner music. My school was putting on some sort of play that took place in the 1920s. It was like an Annie. It wasn't Annie, but it was like about orphans. I can't remember what it was exactly, the title, but it was about orphans or something, and it took place in the 20s. And they needed period music to play in between the set changes. So the teacher had gotten a Billboard Pop Memories 1920s CD. So they used it for the play, and after the play was over, the teacher was going to throw the CD out. And I asked her, I said, well, throw it out. I'll take it with me. This is kind of from the King Kong time period that I'm kind of into now. So I'll check out what the music was like during this time. So I took the CD home and I listened to it, and it was amazing. I mean, there was 2 Jolson tracks on the CD, Sunny Boy and April Showers, the 1920s versions. Something about the guy's voice, mixed in with all the other Paul Whiteman and other contemporaries, Ben Sylvan Orchestra and all this. But Jolson's voice had a difference to it. It was something, I don't want to say odd, but odd compared to the rest of the singers that were on this CD.
Magic.
Yeah.
It's called.
Well, yeah, that, but that's, the 20s recordings sometimes don't grasp the same fidelity as the Decca ones did. So to me, at the time, it just sounded different, odd in a good way, but different. So I was looking at the booklet, and I found that this guy was in the first talkie. Should try to find that movie. And so I found the jazz singer at a flea market on VHS, and I took that home, and it was the Coffee Dan's sequence. And that's when I realized that this was something that was really cool, this guy. And not only his connection with the talkies, and I'm a big Chaplin fan too. It's funny that like 2 of my favorite people, it's the guy who resisted talkies the most, and then the guy who pushed him into the forefront. So I've always found that funny that those 2 are a lot of my main interests. But from the jazz singer, it was just from then I had to get everything I could. I had to get every CD. I had to come across the Jolson story, and it's been a ride ever since. And now with the internet, I had the internet then, but it wasn't like YouTube and everything. I had to still go out and get CDs and find this music. It wasn't instantly accessible like it is now. I've been to quite a few of the Jolson conventions that are put on by the International Jolson Society, and I began singing Jolson in high school, throwing that out there, because even though nobody really knew what I was doing, I enjoyed it. And Richard Halpern was a performer at this particular convention, and he liked the show I was doing, and he put me up on stage at that show. And ever since then, I've been performing on and off Jolson shows in California and at multiple Jolson Society events, and even here in Florida when I get a gig. But honestly, I mean, Jolson and Richard Halpern really gave me the courage to get up and share the music of this guy that we all enjoy so much.
I remember seeing the video of your performance at the 2008 convention on YouTube a couple of years ago. I never realized. Of course, I didn't know the backstory, but yeah, it's quite wonderful to listen to. I thought you were one of the fellows who was already invited to come and perform. No idea that was your debut.
Well, yeah, the first convention I showed up in like baggy pants and with like Charlie Chaplin like black eye makeup around. I didn't know what I was doing. I knew I wanted to look different. I knew I wanted to be a part of this Jolson thing, but I didn't know exactly how to achieve it. And I'd never met any of these people before. So I show up to this thing in this, Chaplin look-alike costume kind of sorta with then singing Jolsons. It was like this hodgepodge of all these things I liked, and I just kind of threw it all together. And I got so many questions that people were confused. They didn't know if I meant to be there or if I worked at the hotel. Because at that time, I was definitely the youngest person that had attended this particular convention.
Yeah,
And
that's
they
the
all,
funny thing. That's the funny thing I want to mention because up to that point, everybody said, "Oh, you're so young, Jens and I, we're now in or early and I'm the mid 30s." So everybody always said, "Oh, you're the youngest," and then you showed up, and that's a whole new generation because you're even a lot younger than we are. So it's incredible how this is being perpetuated. I mean, it's great.
Yeah, I have 10 years on you, Andrea. If you're in your early 30s, I'm in my mid
Uh,
40s, and
I'm not in my earlier 30s anymore, unfortunately.
oh, okay. Well, in any
Oh,
case, I'm in my mid 40s. But I think if you were to
Yeah.
take a poll of every Jolson fan in the world, I may still be considered on the younger side. But I
Yes.
want to say it's fantastic to see people even younger who love Jolson, who are perpetuating his memory and his legacy. It's
Yeah.
fantastic.
and I think the internet really helps nowadays because you can look this stuff up instantly, and
Right.
I feel like the internet and YouTube can only help Jolson's legacy and bring him
Yeah.
back into the stratosphere of pop culture history.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy now to just type a couple words into YouTube and you have almost his entire everything he ever did. You can almost find on YouTube. It may not. It probably isn't supposed to be on there, but it is.
Right, right. And I think another good thing about the internet is that because before the internet, I felt so alone in my love for Jolson. I felt I couldn't, there was no way to tell other than the Jolson Society, which I said I was a member of years ago, but it was much more difficult to contact other Jolson fans. And now, like you say, Nigel, it just takes a few clicks on the internet and here we are.
Yeah, exactly.
well,
So why don't we jump into the next little topic here? I asked everyone to prepare just a list of 3 Jolson songs that are their particular favorites. And they can be from the movies, from the radio shows, from the Decca recordings throughout his entire career. Because I know there's so much Jolson history, and I'm sure we have favorites from all the different eras. And I'd like to just go around the table here, and we can start with Andrew again, and just find out what Jolson songs are your favorites and why.
Okay, well, it's a tough task to
Yeah,
accomplish.
it changes every week. I
Right,
understand.
exactly.
Yeah.
So what I do is I just pick 3 that at the moment I have a special connection with, and I tried to go off the beaten path a little bit. I didn't want to be too predictable. So my first song I want to talk about is I want to go with the Columbia version of "I'm Going South." I think the song is fantastic for a lot of different reasons. First of all, it epitomizes that early 20s Jolson because it talked about the South, the imagery and the lyrics. I know he didn't write the lyrics, but the imagery and the lyrics just paint a clear picture of the South and the South that Jolson loved, despite the fact that he came from nowhere near there. And and I think plus it features, especially another interesting anecdote about this song is that he recorded it twice in the span of a month. It was one of his last recordings for Columbia, then he recorded it again for Brunswick in January of 24 after having recorded it in December of 23 for Columbia. So I think the Columbia version for some reason is more readily available out there. And the Columbia version features one of, and I can't remember if the Brunswick version does as well, but the Columbia version features one of his half-spoken choruses towards the end of the song, where he puts his heart and soul into his cry for the South and how much he loves the South. And so I wanted to go with "I'm Going South" that features that Columbia Orchestra. Interesting to note that it's one of the last recordings he made for Columbia, because I guess his contract expired at the end of 23. And then he signed on with Brunswick. But so "I'm Going South" is my first song. So do you want all 3 now, or are we gonna do?
Yeah, go ahead. All 3
Okay,
is fine.
okay. And then for my second song, I want to choose "When I Leave the World Behind," and that's another winning combination. Berlin pen song sung by Jolson. He sang it a number of times. And just to be a little different, the version I want to go with is the version that he is the version he sang on his Colgate radio program of, I believe, January 43. He sang "When I Leave the World Behind," and every time he sang the song, he later recorded it for Decca. He really sold it. I mean, it's the song itself, the lyrics itself are enough to, melt your heart and bring a tear to your throat. But and then add on top of that Jolson's way of selling it. It's just a fantastic song. And as much as I love the Decca version, I wanted to point out to those who might listen to this that aren't aware of that version in his Colgate radio show. I thought he really sold it and really did a fantastic job in singing that song during that particular broadcast. And the Colgate shows, unfortunately, they haven't all been saved. I believe only some are available, but this obviously is one episode that's pretty readily available and easy to get your hands on through the Jolson Society. I'm sure one can get their hands on this particular episode. And then for my third selection, I will just go with the one song I mentioned earlier, only because of the personal connection I have to it. Actually, I like the 1918 version of Rockabye Baby with a Dixie melody better than the 46. I believe it's 46, maybe 47 Decca version. But if forced to choose between the two, I would pick the 1918 version. But the 46 version or the Decca version has not much more, but it has a special connection to me because it's what opened the door to the world of Jolson. It would be hard to pick any song over that because of the personal connection as well. So the Decca version of Rockabye Baby with the Dixie melody as available and as, I don't want to say obvious of a pick that might be, I still want to pick it because of a lot of reasons, both mostly personal.
Great. Love it. Love that list.
Thank you.
Andrea, do you want to go next?
First of all, I found it very, very difficult, of course, to just choose 3 songs, because when I started, I was more into the earlier recordings, like Victor and the early Columbia recordings. Then later, I discovered his deep voice, and I loved that. And since I'm German, I love very much the Yiddish songs he did, like Cantor on the Sabbath, which is great. I really love that. So funny and everything. And I don't know why, and I have to admit that, but I love the Stephen Foster songs, like Beautiful Dreamer, which I love so much because of it was, it's more of it's the song of my marriage and everything. It was played at our wedding and everything. Oh. And the other songs like My Old Kentucky Home and Old Folks at Home, I don't know why, but I love this. But I thought, no, I need to pick 3. So my all-time favorites, and I do not have a particular version, just the 3 songs, I would pick then Rockabye Baby with a Dixie melody, My Mammy, and April Showers, because mostly, of course the whole songs are great, but mostly of the ending. I love the dramatic endings these 3 songs especially have. I just love it. I think it's called crescendo when you get so loud at the end.
Yeah.
I love that. So Rockabye Baby with a Dixie melody, My Mammy, and April Showers, these would be my all-time favorites. Whenever I have these songs, played, that's just, that's it.
You can't go wrong with those 3.
Exactly. No matter which from which decade, I love them always.
All right, Vlad, you're next.
Well, I'm going to piggyback on what Andrea just said about Rockabye Baby with a Dixie melody.
Wow, there's a theme here. We'll get to mine, too. We're going to be really similar. It's funny.
Simplest song to Mammy in terms of the emotions that it evokes about, going back to your family, going back to your home. But for me, the ending of Rockabye Baby with a Dixie melody works is a little stronger than Mammy, and it's after the first time I sang it, it became my favorite Jolson song. I mean, it was in the top 10 because after the first time I sang it in performance, I felt that buildup that leads to that crescendo that Andrea mentioned. And if you watch Jolson perform Rockabye Baby with a Dixie melody in the Rose of Washington Square, which I think technically is the finest motion picture recording of Jolson performing, it's electric. It's almost like by the end of the song, the way I like to put it is, it's like he's shooting electricity out of every pore of his body. And that the emotional buildup at the end of that song is just incredible. And besides that one, I have a couple more obscure favorites, and they're favorites because of the version, which are not particularly. It's really not very available. They're versions of songs that I've only discovered within the last 3 years because they were both. One is Way Down Yonder in New Orleans, but not the Decca version, but the unreleased rehearsal takes, and there's several of them that I've heard through the kindness of a fellow Jolson collector. Um, Basically, it's done in a more speeded up, upbeat, happy tempo, and Jolson throws in, he opens the song. Guess where do you think I'm going when the wind starts blowing strong? Guess
Guess.
where do you think I'm going when the nights are growing long? I ain't going east. I ain't going west. Ain't
Ain't
going.
going over that cuckoo's
Uh,
nest.
and he ends the song in a similar with a kind of a similar refrain. There's a liveliness to that. There's liveliness to all those recordings that he made for Columbia Pictures back in the late '40s for the two movies, The Jolson Story and Jolson Sings Again. And it's a shame that version has never been released. The Decca recordings are technically more perfect, but some of them just don't have the same electricity, the same what would say joie de vivre in French.
Because a lot of the Decca recordings were made from different takes, and they kind of cobbled together some of those because Jolson, missing the lung and everything that he had in the '40s, he couldn't really always give out. He couldn't do a perfect take from beginning to end. Sometimes he had to kind of do it in pieces, and then they would edit it together later on, which is a testament because they do sound so good. And that's something I never even would have thought about until I learned that some of those were taken pieces from here and pieces from there to make the complete song.
Right, and that brings me to the last song that's my favorite. Um, and this last, and hopefully that particular version of Way Down Yonder in New Orleans is going to be released in the future on one of the society CDs. If anybody's listening to this, but the song that if somebody told me, if you had to listen to one Jolson song right now, I mean, it would depend on the mood. But I would say, if I really wanted to feel Jolson's soul, the song that I would listen to is the unreleased version of My Mother's Rosary, which has just been released on that double CD set that the Jolson Society released at the time of the last convention this year in 20. I first heard that song, and I mean, I heard it first about 3 years ago. Like I said, I was fortunate to get some rarer material through the kindness of a collector, which I've not disseminated, nor will I ever, because it was purely for my own use. But when I first listened to it, I had the headphones on, and every hair on my back stood up because he put so much soul into the song. And I don't know the full story, but correct me if I'm wrong, Nigel, if this particular version, this alternate take, unused take of My Mother's Rosary was found in Earl Jolson's attic by Earl and her friend Doug Galloway, the former Variety reporter who lives in Los Angeles, sometime in the mid '80s. I believe I read on a discussion site somebody relating that story. So I'm thinking that it must have been a take that was really close to Jolson's heart, that he actually kept a disc of it, even though it wasn't the one that was released.
Yeah.
And it's the version, in case anybody's wondering, it's the version that opens with the voice of a woman doing, kind of I don't know if it's an aria, but a woman's voice opens it just, vocalizing, not singing any words, and then Jolson comes in, and it's quite different than the version that was released on the Decca version that was released, and it's the most soulful version of any song that of Jolson's that, to me,
Wow.
that I've ever heard. I mean, it just cuts me right, and I feel it in my heart when he starts singing. After that, the woman is finished with her little aria. I'm getting a little choked up just thinking about it right now.
Well, as far as my list is concerned, you actually, Vlad, you actually covered Rockabye from Rosa Washington Square. So I'm not going to include that one, but I do want to echo that not only is the fidelity of those tracks amazing, it's the perfect blend between the Jolson of the 1910s and the Decca Jolson. It's like this perfect assemblage of perfect audio quality, his voice in perfect shape in his prime, and the orchestrations which have that same fire that the orchestrations of the teens and 20s had, with the benefit of the modern day, at that time, technology. I almost think, when you go into the Decca era, the orchestrations were much more lush. They were much more 40s based, trying to fit in with the Harry James and all that stuff of the times. But the 1939 Rose recordings are just perfection to me.
Yeah.
And if I tried to get anybody into Jolson, those would be the ones I would play. And the Rockabye one in particular is my favorite. But since you mentioned that one, I went with my other picks.
Well, Nigel, I'm sorry that I stole your thunder.
No, that's fine. That's fine because it gives us a chance to talk about something that I wanted to talk about anyway, but I had to leave off. So the first one I'm gonna pick is "Used to You" from 1929. I guess the Brunswick recording. I think that's a great recording from beginning to end. I like the tempo, I like his voice, and I like the whistling solo. That's one of my favorite Jolson whistling solos. And the one from the film is great too, but I think I enjoy the recording more, if I had to pick. The other one is Toot Toot Tootsie from Jolson Sings Again. It's a short and sweet recording, but it's got that Jolson fire. It's got that Jolson energy in it. It sounds different than the Decca recording that was issued. And yeah, obviously there's an unreleased version out there that has an extra verse in it that's not in the film, which I'm sure you can get through the Jolson Society. And then my third pick, if we're not counting Rockabye, is the version of Swanee that Jolson sang at the George Gershwin Memorial Concert.
Oh,
Without the whistling.
With no whistling.
Right.
He actually sings that verse, or I'm sorry, sings the chorus instead of whistling like he normally does. And I just think that particular version has so much weight, but at the same time is a great tribute to Jolson and George Gershwin.
Yes.
And that's my list.
Yeah, that's awesome, Nigel. One point about one of the components of your list. They used to you the Brunswick recording. I know he made another version for the film, but if I'm not mistaken, there's also an unissued take or an alternate take that's floating around of "Used to You" from the same Brunswick session. I could be wrong, and maybe.
Ooh. I might have heard it, but I might have thought it was the same one. I'm not sure. I know
Right.
I have an album that has alternate takes. It's got like a pinkish cover. It's got Jolson from like the 30s on it. It might be on that one. I'll have to listen to that.
Yeah, and I'm not sure myself because I know some of that Brunswick session, the one that included "Why Can't You" and "Memories of One Sweet Kiss." That's the session you're talking about. I think there is some. I'm not sure, but I think there is a record, and maybe the one you're referring to that includes both takes of some of those tracks.
Oh, cool. I
Yeah.
might have it. I have so much. I have to go back and see what I even have. So.
Exactly, that's my situation as well.
So one last thing I wanted to ask before we wrap this show up. I think this went fantastically, honestly, especially for a bunch of people who never talked in person before. Regarding Jolson's legacy, what would you like to see have done to kind of bring Jolson's? Because, you think of Elvis Presley and Sinatra and Dean Martin and these people that are still relevant in today's culture. They're still relevant in today's industry. Jolson was just as big as they were, but for whatever reason, whether it be the blackface or his style, just kind of is so old-fashioned now that a lot of people don't even want to consider him. How would you go about spreading the Jolson history and legacy to 21st century pop culture?
Boy, that's a
Yeah, that's a tough one.
human memories are short. Most people, they love the music they grew up with, and they're not so up to date on music that was before. And the problem in that regard with Jolson isn't just that the musical styles have changed. Tin Pan Alley went out and all that stuff. It's that he died just as the television era was getting going, and he had signed to do, I think, 2 or 3 specials for CBS, just shortly before his passing. But there's no television record, of Jolson, and the recordings that we have, fortunately, from the late 40s are good enough quality to listen to today, but the earlier ones are not by the standards of most folks today. The internet, having said that, is almost like a giant encyclopedia, and it's made the most obscure Jolson material available to just about everybody. So I guess, that's a good thing. It's material is there, and it's always going to be there for those who are looking for it to happen upon it. I guess performing his music wherever and however we can. You're doing a much bigger part in that regard than I am. But I mean, that's one thing. Obviously, because I truly believe that there's a significant percentage of people today, who have never even heard of Jolson, who, if they heard him sing, would become fans. Maybe not fanatics like we are, but would like the music. And so, my hope behind my show, which is, I just title it the Jolson Tribute Show, and if you put in those 3 words, you can find it on YouTube. I mean, I perform for veterans who remember Jolson, but my secret hope is that a few of the other folks who happen to be at those shows, would maybe think enough of those songs to give them a listen. And I'm sure that's happened at your shows many, many times, Nigel. And the other way, obviously, is by doing what Andrea's doing, and that is to create up-to-date new documentaries that people are going to be interested in watching. Film documentaries or video documentaries. Yeah,
that's something that always intrigues me, is the lack of Jolson documentaries that there are. It's almost like, PBS just did a great one on Walt Disney. PBS, American Experience, American Masters, A&E. There's all these channels that do these shows, and they don't seem to ever want to touch Jolson. And I think it's because they're either uneducated on his history, or they're afraid to touch it because of the blackface issue. Yeah. They don't even want to deal with that.
Yeah, I think that's...
I think it's part of it.
Documentary would be if somebody could sell, someplace like PBS, on a new angle that Jolson, he performed in makeup on Broadway, and today that's inappropriate. But hey, the real story is almost the exact opposite of what you would think. This is more to advance African American music, to make it popular, to support African American composers and artists and anybody. And I think that would be a very interesting way to do a documentary, because it stands conventional wisdom on its head, and that would get people's attention.
And not only that, but Elvis's huge influence through his mother was Jolson, and he even "Are You Lonesome Tonight" is a Jolson cover essentially. Yeah. I mean, it's not a song that
Sinatra too was a huge Jolson fan.
Yeah, I mean, if you listen to the Elvis version of "Are You Lonesome Tonight," it's almost exactly the Jolson version.
Yeah,
the orchestration, the phrasing,
the spoken chorus.
Yes,
exactly. Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think you all 3 of you made some great points when talking about this topic, and especially something. Well, first of all, I want to say part of the reason, obviously, is the blackface thing, the fact that the styles have changed in music. But another reason, and I think Vlad did touch upon this, is part of the reason why Jolson seems in a way to be forgotten today is because he died at the end of the first half of the 20th century. If you ask anybody today who were the greatest performers of the 20th century, they're going to mention people that performed in the second half: the Beatles, Elvis, Sinatra. And that's just, for some reason, that first half of the 20th century it's just almost like a black hole for people today for some reason. It's
After
almost like
World War II, it seems, yeah.
Right. It's almost like entertainment for today's generation started, not even today's generation, but generations that are alive today have started in 1950, and for some reason I think we need to raise more awareness of that first half of that 20th century. You're all doing some great things. I don't have the musical ability that Nigel and Vlad has. I don't have the filmmaking ability that Andrea has, so I'm not able to promote Jolson's legacy that way. But I think, to answer your question, Nigel, is what we need to do is use what we have, our technology. We use this technology to just, and I'm guilty of this myself, I don't do it nearly enough, but just share and disseminate Jolson as much as possible so that it reaches as many ears and eyes as possible. And also, I like Vlad's idea about, I think a new biopic or a new documentary is definitely in order. And I think instead of, and Nigel's exactly right in saying that part of the reason that hasn't happened, I think, is because no one wants to touch the blackface issue. I think the opposite approach is the correct one. Approach it head on and say, yes, this is exactly what happened, but here's the real story behind it. And let's dispel the myth of what happened. Yeah, of course he blacked up, that's right, but here's why, and here's how it was accepted in the day. As far as my personal plans in promoting Jolson is, like I said, I'm not able to take my show on stage. I don't have a singing voice, and even the voice I do possess sounds nothing like Jolson. What I do have is a understanding and a fluency of Italian language and culture. So I might plan on, I think Andrea mentioned something earlier about how she blogs or wrote some articles in German regarding Jolson. Italians in general are fascinated by American culture, but I think more so even, I mean, if Jolson has been forgotten by American audiences, imagine how unknown he is to Italian audiences. I plan on writing blogs and articles about Jolson in Italian for Italian audiences, hoping to open up some awareness of Jolson to that part of the world.
That's so great. That's so, I love all those answers, and it's funny that we don't even really have to think. When I asked that question, none of you really had to even think that hard about it. It's almost like those are things that have always been on your mind, and you've just been waiting to expel in some way, shape, or form. So I like that a lot. I like that. And well, of course, there's the the Jolson Society, which does its part. They produce the Jolson journals that are, I think they have 2 or 3 of those a year now. Or the membership of the Jolson Society is honestly, it's dwindling because there just aren't a lot of younger people that have an interest in that anymore. And that's what we're trying to kind of turn around. And using this technology, YouTube, podcast, talk shows, which is the hot thing, the end thing right now. It's just fun to get on here with a bunch of other Jolson fans and just talk about it without having any of the negative connotations or feeling like when you're talking about Jolson with people that aren't familiar with him that you almost have to defend. You automatically come off almost apologizing for Jolson before you even start talking about him.
That's
because you
that's
already
exactly.
kind of assume what their reaction's going to be. So you kind of start off already on the defense and apologizing for the things they may or may not find offensive about him right off the bat without any prior knowledge.
That's right. I find that many times I've had to try and do my best to dispel misinformation and stereotypes and myths that were untrue. But I'd like to at some other time get your techniques on how you've done that, because anyone who's been a Jolson fan for a number of times has had to do that. So I'd like to sometimes look for some, maybe hear from some of you and some other Jolson fanatics on some effective arguments that one could make when trying to defend Jolson from someone that really, to be perfectly honest, doesn't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
It's I mean, the way to do that is, best defense is a good offense. I kind of, like I said, when I do the little biographical part at the beginning of my performances, the thing I lead off with is, hey, there's a lot more to the Jolson story than what you know, and what there is his role in championing equal treatment of African Americans, of supporting and advancing the music as well as the many individuals who are African American composers and performers, and kind of lead with that before they get to, before they bring up the the makeup card. I don't like to use the other word for just that reason, the connotation.
Yeah. Well, even Warner Brothers, when they put the Jazz Singer out on DVD, they were afraid to use a picture of Jolson on the cover. They have it like in him in silhouette.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, why don't you just use the one from him and doing Blue Skies, that poster? Why couldn't you use it? Why do you have to create a new poster of him in blackface, but then hide the blackface? Hide him. Yeah. And even on the Rosa Washington Square DVD that came out a couple of years ago, they took the original poster, but they photoshopped whiteface Jolson head over an originally blackface Jolson. So it's like his face is not even a couple centimeters long. It's so small on the cover. But I think they're just so terrified of getting backlash from people that get upset about this stuff that they don't even want to deal with it.
I hate to say it, because of the climate and the atmosphere today, I was actually very pleasantly surprised that new release that from a few years ago, that updated release of the Jazz Singer was even allowed to go to press, because I'm at the you get so paranoid sometimes that no one's going to even. There'd be too much opposition when anyone even tries to release new Jolson material that it would just get stopped before it even gets to the production phase. But I was happy to see that package was released, and I thought they did a good job with it.
Well, that's the one good thing about that is the Jazz Singer is such a legacy on its own. It's impossible to whitewash that.
Exactly.
Even with the blackface and everything in it, it's impossible as the first talkie to ignore it.
It has too much historical importance. That's right.
Yeah.
Andrea, I'd just like to invite Andrea. I don't think doing a documentary like you've been doing for 10 years, I mean, that has more chance of reaching more people than I think anything that any of the rest of us here can do. So
we hope so. Yes.
And did you also do a documentary on the Jolson and the Jazz Singer?
Oh yeah, that's exactly. It's not so much an entertaining movie. It's really more academic. So it's really something for people who really want to get, it's most about the blackface thing and of course the whole history about the jazz singer. So it's really not for a broad audience. We played this here in Kiel at a movie theater, and we had 4 people attending, and we knew all 4 of them actually. So because they were just going there because we invited them personally. So no one else, although it was advertised, a lot, no one really, it's not in the heads of the people, not even the jazz singer, at least not here in Germany. So it didn't catch much attention. So then we thought, okay, our actual documentary needs to aim at the broadest possible way. So
of course, yeah. If somebody wanted to view that jazz singer documentary, the finished one that you did, is there a way for them to do that, or as of now, it's only available when you screen it theatrically?
No, we have a website called aj-images.com, and you can find all our contact details there. We can send out the DVD to anyone who wants to watch it.
Oh, great.
Yeah, of course.
Perfect. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for participating in this episode, and let's hope this is something that takes off and that people want to hear more episodes on. Well, I mean, we're going to make them anyway, but
yeah, exactly.
But I'm sure it'll reach its audience, and I hope the listeners find semblance in all the things we talked about today, as far as things that they hold dear to them and that they agree with. All right, thanks so much, everybody, and I guess we'll see you on the next episode. So take care of yourselves, and we have to rack our brains to come up with another topic. I'm sure we have nothing else to talk about when it comes to Jolson. Thanks for listening.